Hello and welcome. It was popular belief he was destined to be the next leader of Malaysia, and Newsweek magazine named him Asian of the Year in 1998. But it was that same year his life turned upside down as he found himself in jail on charges of corruption and sexual misconduct. This week on 1 meet the former Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim. It was not the first time he had found himself in jail, having been locked away as a student social activist in the early 1970s. Anwar Ibrahim had been fighting on the streets for the rights of Malaysia's poor, but found it far more effective trying to change the system from the inside. That began his meteoric rise in politics, beginning with his election to Parliament in the 1980s, going on to become Deputy Prime Minister to Asia's strongman Mahathir Mohamad. Ibrahim's tight control of the finance ministry during the Asian financial crisis of 1997 is credited with saving Malaysia, but a major disagreement with Mahathir over handling certain financial concerns turned the leader from mentor to angry rival. Under charges of corruption and sodomy, Ibrahim was severely beaten and held for 4 years. His treatment led to massive protests on Kuala Lumpur streets, with a call for reform against what were disputed as trumped-up charges. Ibrahim's release in 2004 came with a ban from taking part in politics until 2008, leading him to life as an academic in the USA and planning his next steps towards his political return. Dr. Anwar, thank you very much for your time. Let me start by asking you, you're described as both a controversial and charismatic figure in Malaysian politics, and you've been criticized sometimes for being, or trying to be, all things to all people. Now, how difficult is it, to try to please everyone?
I don't think the issue is trying to please, just to do the right job. And Malaysia is a multiracial, multireligious country, so you'll have to engage. You have to speak to the audience. You speak to the Chinese, of course you quote Confucius or the Chinese scholars, and to the Muslims recite the Quran, or to the general audience Shakespeare. I don't believe that there is a contradiction there. The central message is, of course, democracy or reform or justice or development.
So what is the core philosophy of your politics then? How are you able to do that, to be something to people across that span?
You enter politics to serve, and you are given a mandate to dedicate yourself to a program, to an agenda. Of course, growth and development and justice. And you'll have to pursue that agenda.
You've had quite a roller coaster life, from high-profile student activist up to deputy prime minister to convict and rallying cry for the reformists in your country, opposition icon as you've been described. How has that experience, that kind of roller coaster ride, changed your personal philosophy and how you approach your politics now?
But consistently throughout this period, I have always called for reform Muslim society, and wanting to see Malaysia as a successful, modern nation. And but of course, this you have matured in the process. You have had some exposure to different experiences, and you tend to understand and appreciate things better.
You mentioned you've always called for reform, and even within the Muslim world. From an early age, you've been involved in trying to promote interreligious tolerance, right from your student activism days. Now, in the time you were in prison, September the 11th happened, and of course the world changed quite radically. What kind of difference did you notice in trying to promote a more sort of moderate Islam after you had come out?
It's more challenging because there is a lot of prejudice against the Muslim world, or the Muslims generally, and Islamophobia increased.
Yeah.
But on the part of the Muslims, there's also an increased rage, anger, feeling that they've been marginalized and exploited and suppressed and misunderstood. So you will have to navigate your way, and it is more challenging, more difficult.
How surprised were you at the reaction, both in the East and West, to the cartoons that were done in Scandinavia depicting the Prophet Muhammad?
The debate is getting irrational. On the one hand, we have the West talking about freedom. The issue is not freedom, it's resurrecting prejudices of the dark ages of the past. And Muslims are not against the principle of freedom, but an attempt or clear denigration of the Prophet. But they're also enraged. And when a community gets to be so angry, there's no rational argument or action. So you have, for example, every right, as I expressed, to condemn the excesses of the cartoon or protest, which is fair. But you cannot then choose to act and burn property or destruction of life and property, because that runs contrary to the very principle that Islam stands for.
Now, in fact, you have said at a seminar, speaking at one seminar, you said that democracy in the Muslim world has been hijacked by Western players. Why is that?
Well, because it is presented in a very condescending manner, that this is a Western agenda, this is an American agenda, and this is dangerous, because then the Muslims feel that this is something alien. On the contrary, what we want to present, this is essentially an indigenous demand by Muslims, as we see, for example, the development in Indonesia or Turkey, and that this has been a consistent demand by all the freedom fighters against the Dutch in Indonesia, against British in Malaysia, and most part of the Muslim world. They have consistently demanded for freedom and democracy.
Although you have also said that, if there is a stench in our backyard, just to attack America would be unfair. So to what extent do you lay the blame at the hands of Muslim leaders too?
I've called for reform within the Muslim community. They will have to come to terms with some of the contentious issues within them, the rational demands, the hysteria against the West, and particularly the United States. They must reserve the right to criticize the United States in these excesses or flawed foreign policy prescriptions, but they should not use these flaws to cover the stench in their own backyard. Look at the treatment of gender inequality, educational standards, the detention without trial, the unfree media. These are issues that Muslims must deal with, or even extremism or fanaticism, or the propensity to commit violence in the name of Islam. These are issues that Muslims must deal with.
But to what extent do you oppose Western intervention, as America went into Iraq, for example, to topple Saddam Hussein?
I support the American agenda for reform and democracy and freedom, and I'm not apologetic about that. But of course, I oppose the manner it is done. Say, for example, in Iraq, firstly, the whole thesis is flawed. The intelligence clearly misled the community, the international community, and I don't believe that you need to use the force of arms to change. This is essentially a battle of ideas. The Americans must have the resolve, and we support that resolve to ensure that there is freedom throughout the world.
You've quoted Indonesia and Turkey as good examples of Muslim countries. To what extent can Malaysia, being a fairly secular and moderate Muslim nation as well, be a good example of how Islam is a peaceful religion?
Malaysia is a multiracial, multi-religious country. We have had this remarkable success in terms of forging these communities together towards development and progress. And we have had this fantastic experience of a social contract between the various communities and presenting a viable, practical constitution that safeguard and guarantee basic rights and civil liberties. Unfortunately, throughout the years, we have authoritarian tendencies that have hijacked this agenda. And now we don't have a free media, the judiciary has been compromised, and we don't have free and fair elections. But because we have had that tradition and that history, and economically is quite robust compared to most developing economies. I am very optimistic that we can trigger this new wave of reform in Malaysia.
It was a very different world from that in which you grew up, of course. So take me through your childhood, growing up in Cheruk Tokun village in Penang state. What was it like in those days?
It's very rural. We didn't have electricity, water supply then. And my father was then paramedic, hospital assistant, we call those days. My mother was very active in the ruling party, very active in anti-British, anti-colonial struggle. But we were very religious in that context, very traditional religious community. But because of the role my father played, both in politics and also as a government servant, we mingle very freely with all my uncles and aunties who are Hindus and Christians and Buddhists, who were our neighbors.